Can we start with who you are? You said you're a native of Gwinnett County. Can you tell us a little bit about how your family came to Gwinnett?
Well, my name is Mary Frazier Long. I was born on May the 4th, 1932, on what is now, it was McDaniel Street when I was born, and it was named for the McDaniels who were in the Revolutionary War. But people change names of streets. I wish they wouldn't do it. I wish they'd just leave the history there. However, will be 85 years old this year, and I think I'm sort of like the fella on the commercial. I've seen a thing or two, so I know a thing or two. And I do know a little bit about old Lawrenceville and old Gwinnett County. My dad had a general merchandise store on Croghan Street, and I tell people that I graduated from the University of Croghan Street. And I learned a lot in that store. I was the youngest of my mother's 6 children, and I was sort of a free-range child. I wandered Lawrenceville. It was a safe place. You could just go anywhere you wanted to go as a child and not be harmed. It was just wonderful. I loved being from Lawrenceville, and it's captured my heart from a long time ago. I stayed in the general store and listened to the old farmers talk. One of them was named Cliff Wofford, and he had been in World War I, and he talked about being overseas, and it was just spellbinding to hear him. Another one was a man named Ozzie Butler, and he traveled the state of Georgia and gave me a real view. I'd never been outside of Gwinnett County until I was grown. We didn't travel much, but the thing that we did for entertainment on Sunday afternoons, sometimes we went for a ride. Things are so different now. We didn't have a telephone in the house until I was a teenager, and now people are walking around in stores talking on cell phones. I've seen so many changes that I just can't enumerate all the changes. I remember when we just had one traffic light in Lawrenceville, and I think it was kind of a joke around town. They didn't know what color to use on the traffic light, red or green. But it's been interesting. I think I was born when Herbert Hoover was president during the Depression, 1932. But we didn't know there was a Depression until I grew up and read about it. But we grew our own vegetables, and when we moved to downtown Lawrenceville, we moved to a street called Sassafras Alley. And I think one thing was we couldn't spell sassafras, but my mother thought we were so lucky to get to live in Lawrenceville that she went to the city council and asked them to name it Luckie Street. And that's how Luckie Street got its name. My dad's store was on Croghan Street, and it was kind of parallel to Luckie Street, not far from our house. But between our house and Croghan Street was a little alley that's now called Honest Alley. And I spent a lot of time, a little girl, can you imagine a little girl going to Honest Alley, and the men were trading for horses and mules and shooting dice and probably selling bootleg whiskey in Honest Alley. And I just had a good time there. There was a blacksmith named Mr. Tiller, and I could watch him put things in the fire and hammer them into a shape that he wanted, and he shoed horses and mules. There was a lot of horse trading that went on in Honest Alley. And we had a medicine show every once in a while, which was just amazing to me because we didn't have a lot of other entertainment. We had people that we talked to each other, and we sat on front porches and got to know each other really well. And later on, when I was a teenager, I liked to tell people that I was in the theater. I sold popcorn at the Colonial Theater on Perry Street, and the building is now used for a church. But that was wonderful too. It was a great experience to meet people, and that was during World War II, which was a defining war for this area. So many of our men went to that war and were killed. And I remember especially one young man named Red Wages, who was killed in a plane. And that was, his mother was a Gold Star mother. So there's so many experiences that I've had that it's just hard to enumerate everything. So, and I graduated from Lawrenceville High School in 1949. We became a part of the Gwinnett County school system in 1948. But 1949, my diploma still said Lawrenceville High School. And there were 24 members of my graduating class, which is a great change from the hundreds that are graduating now from Central Gwinnett.
You mentioned that there are too many things for you to enumerate, but
Right.
you did enumerate some things. You've written a book. Can you tell us about the book you've written?
I wrote a book about Lawrenceville because there were so many things that I really wanted to remember, and I didn't capture everything in the town, but I thought it was significant that we remember that Lawrenceville was named for James Lawrence, who was important during the War of 1812. And so many of the streets and places in Lawrenceville were named for men who were in that war. Pike Street was named for Zebulon Pike, and that's the name of a county. Zebulon, Georgia is the county seat of that county. But James Lawrence died in a battle with Britain during the War of 1812. And incidentally, if we'd had the communications that we have today, that war probably would never have been fought. But he died saying, "Don't give up the ship," and that was a motto that the Navy had been using, but it became the motto for the United States Navy. And James Lawrence was a pretty young man. I think he was in his early 30s when he died. But he never came to Gwinnett County, but the city fathers who were organizing the town. And I think it's significant that when we started the town, too, one thing that impressed me was that on the hill at the corner of Oak Street and North Perry, we had, the school was on the highest place in the county. I think that's the highest place in Gwinnett County. But our city fathers, excuse me, put the school up on the hill and the politicians down lower. So the courthouse was down on flatter ground, and that says something about the regard in which education was held by our early fathers, city fathers. The first school up there started in 1895, and the first graduating class was in 1899. 4 women graduated, and one of the women was Miss Lily Ambrose, who became Miss Lily Exum. And she lived next door to us in a house where the main sanctuary of the First Baptist Church is now located on Clayton Street. And Miss Lily later taught 6th grade in the school on the hill, and she often told me not to say ain't. And every time I say ain't now, I think of Miss Lily. She was a great lady.
You mentioned you were an educator. Can you tell
Yes.
us about your service to Gwinnett County?
I started teaching at Grayson, and I graduated from the University of Georgia in 1954, and I started teaching in Grayson in the year 1955-56. And then gas, I think, was about 25 cents a gallon, and I thought it was too expensive to have to drive to Grayson every day to teach, so I started teaching in Lawrenceville on the hill, 57, 58. And I taught with we had great role models when I was growing up, and they were impressive. Miss Annie Kelly taught next door to me, and she was an invaluable resource, helping me to learn. Miss Eliza Carter taught with me in Grayson, and she had been my advising teacher when I was a student teacher. Miss Eliza was from Loganville, and she taught in Gwinnett County. She and Mr. Carter, Mr. Lee Carter. So I had some good advice. The principal, when I was in high school, was Grady Gower, and his son, I think, Grady Jr. still has the house on North Perry Street. And Grady Gower went on to LaGrange College to teach.
How were the schools set up? Were they K through 12? Were these high schools?
We didn't have a kindergarten. We didn't even have a lunchroom when I was in school. We had first grade. I remember Miss Ola Garner was first grade teacher, and most of the teachers did not have a 4-year degree. Most of them went to normal school, and that was a 2-year course of study. Miss Ola Garner had been 2 years, and Miss Bagwell was a second grade teacher. She was just a gentle, nice lady. Both of those women, I think both of them taught for over 50 years in Lawrenceville. And Miss Ola taught first grade all that time. Miss Bagwell, I think, taught first and second grade. She didn't teach the same grade the whole time. But see, school was it was so different back then. The classes were not as big. Of course, we did not have kindergarten. And when they sent you to school, you had to mind the teacher. And sometimes the philosophy was if you got a paddling at school, you got one when you got home too. And I thought that was totally unnecessary. But I remember when I was in the first grade, I didn't like it when Miss Ola Garner wouldn't let you eat when you wanted to. You had to sit still. You had to ask permission to go to the bathroom. And those things I decided just weren't something that I really agreed with. I was 6 years old. And I decided that I just wasn't going to stay at school. And we had a morning recess and an afternoon recess. And the teacher just let you go out. And she stayed in the building and worked on whatever she needed to do. And the children, we just went out and slugged it out on the playground, just like whatever we wanted to do. And the afternoon recess, I decided that I'd had enough of Miss Ola Garner. And so I just walked home. I walked down the hill, Perry Street Hill, and I avoided going by anywhere near my dad's store. And I went around and down Luckie Street, and I hid under the bed until my brother came home from school, because I knew my mother would know she wouldn't like it that I came home early. My mother was pretty tough. She hadn't heard about DFACs back then. And so I hid until my brother came home, and I went outside and I was playing, just having a really good time. And about 5 o'clock, my mother came out and took me by the arm in a really unfriendly way. In fact, she nearly jerked my arm out of the socket. And she took me around the front door, and there stood Miss Ola Garner. She had come to our house to see why I had left school. And she gave my mother a summation of my school career thus far, things that I had not planned to share with my mother. And Miss Ola finally finished by saying, "Mary is not very mature." And my mother said, "She will be tomorrow." And tomorrow I was more mature. And I stayed in school after that. So that was so different, though. See, there was no phone call. There was no phone call. Miss Ola came to the house to tell my mother about my school career. So I got the feeling that not only was Jesus watching you, everybody else in town was too. And people, we cared about each other, and I think we still do in Lawrenceville. I think we still care what happens to each other.
You had a chance to see some of the biggest changes that started the even bigger changes in Gwinnett. There wasn't a Lake Lanier.
No Lake Lanier.
There wasn't an I-85. There wasn't a 316. How was it watching those changes?
I just couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine going to a shopping center, for one thing. Downtown Lawrenceville was just full of grocery stores, and we had, where the fountain is in downtown Lawrenceville now is where Alfred's store was. And before that it was McGee's store, and you bought all your clothes locally. You didn't go to Atlanta. If we went to Atlanta, that was a major undertaking. And women wore hats and gloves and corsets, and I mean, they dressed to go to Atlanta. But I remember that I think it was 1953 when Alfred's installed an elevator, and it was the first elevator in the county, and people came in. It only went up to the second floor, but people came to Alfred's store to ride the elevator. That's how unsophisticated we were. We slept in houses with the windows up because in the summertime and we could hear neighbors snoring next door, and it was just, it is, I can't even express the changes that I have seen, and the traffic is amazing. We had 15 miles per hour traffic going through Lawrenceville. Everybody didn't have a car. Most people walked. Women walked to the grocery store and got their stuff just every other day. And we didn't have big refrigeration either. And we had milk delivered to the door. And the changes that I've seen, I can't imagine. And the expressway was just amazing. I rode the Greyhound bus to Athens to school. I commuted to the University of Georgia. And that was a long trip, but now you just get on 316 and you're there in 30 minutes. So we've gotten faster, but I think we've lost some things along the way too. We've lost the personal communication somewhat.
What are some of the other things you think we've lost from that part of Gwinnett?
Well, we were mainly schools and churches, and nothing was open on Sunday. And you had that day of rest and to take a little ride if you wanted to. We've lost that part of. We're just too busy now to get to know each other like we should, I think. And the churches played a big part in our growing up years. I remember some of the changes when people started getting automobiles, and I think Rhodes Jordan, for one, would leave the keys in his car. He never took the keys out, and he only had his car stolen one time, and they found it pretty soon. My mother was from a big family of 9 Peavies, and for entertainment we went to visiting each other. And she had a sister in Beaufort, and a brother in Lilburn, and one in Five Forks. So when we went to visit those people, we stayed all day and sometimes spent the night. She had a sister in Bethlehem, and it was such a long trip that we always spent the night when we went to see my Aunt Emma Griffith in Bethlehem. But the changes there, I had 36 first cousins, so that's a big family.
How much of your family stayed in the Gwinnett area as opposed to moving out?
A lot of the Pruitts stayed up around the Beaufort, and Philip Beard is one of the relatives up there. And we have a big Pruitt reunion every year. The Peavy family has pretty much gone, but they stayed in Gwinnett County. Most of them stayed around. I had to move out for a while because of my husband's job, but back then teachers could get a job pretty easily. If you hadn't messed up too bad, you could always get a job. I taught 34 years in Georgia public schools, and I can't say I enjoyed every minute of it, but I did enjoy being an educator.
You brought some images with you. Can we go through some of those and talk about some of the things?
Well, I think this is neat. This is Button Gwinnett. This is the picture that's authentic. Somebody found it in a museum in New York, and the one that's in the basement of the governor's mansion is not this one, and it doesn't look like Button Gwinnett. And this is James Lawrence. I got this from the Naval Academy. And this is the city of Lawrenceville. And I just think we have a lot of beautiful flowers blooming in Lawrenceville, I think. You got that? And then the courthouse, I think, this is an old picture. I hope we can get this. This is an old picture of the courthouse when it was early on. This is not the very first courthouse, though, was a log building. And I love the bailiff balcony. You can see it better. One time, they painted it white. And man, it looked ghostly. It was awful looking. And then when they redid it, it looks so much better now. But the bailiff balcony, I remember you could just go in the courthouse and go to court and sit in there and listen to everything that was going on. And I did as a child sometimes go into the courthouse. But the bailiff balcony, the fellow would come out on it and say, hear ye, court is now in session. And he didn't have a loudspeaker. He just yelled it out. And some interesting things went on in that courtroom. And some things maybe that a child shouldn't hear. Brand Bank is over 100 years old. We had a man called, named Bill Arp, who wrote for the Atlanta Journal and Constitution, but it was the Constitution when he was writing for it. And he had his law office at that location, but not in this building. The building that he had was it wasn't nearly as sophisticated looking as that one. It was white. But he moved on to Rome and then to Cartersville, Bill Art did. Charles Smith was his name, and there's a monument to him behind this building that gives his name and his writing. We had, and this, our court lawn is the only courthouse lawn that has people buried on it except Norfolk, Virginia. I think Douglas MacArthur is buried there. But we have men buried who fought in the Indian War in 1838, and that is a monument. That was one of the first uses of Georgia marble from Tate, Georgia. And those men were brought up they were killed in that Indian uprising in 1838. And they were brought back to Gwinnett and buried in a common grave there. I used to be scared to go by the courthouse at night because I really believed in ghosts and Soap Sally. And I put the fountain picture there because we had the store and the first elevator was in that area.
The chickens and the goats, what's the significance of that?
Well, the chickens we had open range laws for a long time. And they just wandered the streets. We didn't have many goats, but we did have chickens. And, the fence around the courthouse, that was originally put there in 1849 to keep the animals out of the courtroom. But they put a wooden fence, and people were building fires, and they'd go up and steal wood, and that didn't work out. Lawyers got the four corners of the courthouse, and that was kind of like letting the fox watch the hen house, I thought. Although I do have a family member who's a lawyer, I tease her all the time about it. But finally, they decided that iron would be a better choice than wooden fence, so they put iron around, but it didn't keep the birds out. The birds were getting in, I think, in the late 1990s. The birds were still flying in the courtroom. That must be disconcerting when you're having a real important trial in the courtroom. And I did bring some pictures of the school. Let me show you that, which I think that's one of the biggest changes that we've had in this county. This county has the leading school system for the state of Georgia. We have some great schools in Gwinnett County and some great teachers, and it's the classroom teachers that make it great. This is the school in 1914, I believe, 1914. And we had the water tank up on the hill, and of course we don't have that anymore. But that was a wooden building, and it caught fire and burned, and then it was replaced with a brick building, and this one had first through the 11th grade in it. And finally, they built another smaller school building in 1935. But those are all gone. They're up on the hill, and they're going to have housing for independent housing. I'm not sure what they're going to have, but it's there was an article in the paper Sunday about it. But some fellows that got mad at the principal, Mr. Nelms. Mr. Nelms was principal then, and they poured gasoline on one of the wooden floors, and it caught fire 1944. It was Sunday night, and the fire had really almost consumed the building before people were aware that the fire was going on up there, and the building burned. We thought we wouldn't go back to school that year, but we found out that the local Board of Education had different ideas, so we went to school in the Baptist church and in an old house up on the hill. And the building was rebuilt and opened up in 48-49 school year. And I got to go in the new building 1 year. Herman Tanner supervised the building of the building that replaced this one, and he did a good job. He learned, Herman said that the man who was building it said that if you use bad material in the building, people will remember a bad job, but they won't remember the cost. And so they used good stuff in the new building, and it was amazing. And I don't think we had but about 100 in high school at that time. And man, they have a lot more than that at Central Gwinnett now. They moved to Central Gwinnett in the 1950s.
How far outside of Lawrenceville did kids come to go to this school?
They came, well, we had a school at Sunny Hill, and that was up about halfway to Buford, off the Brazelton Highway. When they finished the 7th grade at Sunny Hill, I'm not sure if it went to the 8th grade. I think it was just 7th. But they had a choice of going to Decula or Lawrenceville, and some came to Lawrenceville. And that was, we didn't have a regular school bus for a long time, and then I think they converted a truck into a school bus, and they didn't come maybe 5 miles or 6. They didn't come from very far to Lawrenceville. Most of the Lawrenceville children walked to school from quite a distance, and we didn't. I don't think any of us really had a weight problem back then. We walked, and the teachers did too. And I don't remember anybody in my high school that had a car, any high school student. So that's a change, because the parking lot at Central Gwinnett's full of student cars now. But this building, this is not a very good picture of it, but it had windows, and I think the trend now is not to have so many windows because of the heating and air cost.
What happened to the boys who set the building on fire?
Nothing really happened to them. They found out who did it, and they had them to leave town. But and they, I don't think there was ever a court case, but they knew who it was. They found out that they had been mad. Now, Mr. Daggett was principal when I was teaching there, and he was the first principal at Central Gwinnett, and he's the man who chose the Black Knight as the mascot, and that he had gone to West Point, and the Black Knight Society was prominent in West Point, and then there's no school. There may be one in the country that uses the Black Knight, but that is particular to Central Gwinnett, and it's something they ought to really be proud of, and I think they are.
Very good. Were there any other of these images?
Let's see. I wish I had brought my class of 1949. This is the Baptist church that was 1849. It dates back to 1849, but this picture, this building, I think it began in 1899. The cornerstone was laid by the Masons, and this is the one that's now used as the chapel. And the main building is over here, the big building, and that's where the Ambrose house was. Mr. Ambrose was significant at the Baptist church. And right across from it was Salmon Funeral Home. And that's now gone too. landscape of Lawrenceville has really changed, although now the first businesses were on North Perry Street, and the Pentecost building is at the corner of Pike and North Perry, and that's probably the oldest building, and it has a cafe in it now. And it's been used for a post office and a store and a cafe, and let's see, I think there was a TV shop there. A lot of different things have gone on there.
Are you a member of this church?
Yes, I am.
It got a major facelift, huge change of architecture just a few years ago. What brought that about?
Well, this, I don't know, they really changed it, and it was so pretty this way. I think people just decided they needed to modernize things. The ladies that worked on it were, they had good taste, but they just didn't keep it. I wish they kept it like it was. I like the old look. I think we were not as appreciative of things as we ought to have been. This is the female seminary, and it started in the 1830s, and this was where women went to school, and they later on had men. They would accept men students. Well, it burned, and then was rebuilt in the 1850s, and Annette Tucker was instrumental in keeping that from being torn down. It's now the museum, the Gwinnett County Museum. But see now, you can't imagine a time when they wouldn't let girls and boys go to school together. And later on they accepted boys to go to school there, but they wouldn't let them get out at the same time, and they wouldn't let them have recess at the same time. And a lot of interesting things probably went on the school grounds. It later was turned into a playground area for kids to play, and Governor Rivers came and dedicated it. This is the legend. This is the first building of the Christian church, and I think it dated back to the 1920s, and these are two of the older houses. This is the old Tanner house, built in 1919, and it's still standing. And the Martin house is still there, too, on South Perry Street, next to the museum.
The Tanner house has had some interesting recent history. Do you know what's going on with that now? It's been empty for a while, and there's been a lot of work done on it.
And it's just, W.T. Tanner was school commissioner, and I believe they had 10 children, and he chose great stuff. The inside of this has beautiful mantels and fireplaces. It's for sale. It's been for sale for some time. I hope the building is not torn down. The last one to live in it was his, Mary Tanner was the daughter, and after she died, I don't think the family members, I think, had a Christmas time there, maybe for a few years. Bill Tanner is the local lawyer, and Susan is a doctor, and they had all of his children were well educated and had been important to the history of Lawrenceville. Margaret Tanner died last year. She was, I think, past 100. She was over 100, and she would have known a lot of good history. She had been here for so long, and just all of her children were born here, and they were Methodist. They went to the Methodist church. They were really important to that church. And this one, let's see what I have. Oh, the Statue of Liberty. I think this is the corner building up on the square. And these are the City Hall buildings. Yeah, the City Hall was up there on Croghan Street. And then it moved, and the first library was up there too, at the City Hall building. People contributed books, and you had to pay $1 to join the library back then. And this is the second City Hall, and this is the one now that's such a big one. But this is the Loving Aid Society, and that was our African American society to help each other. They had to help each other so much. with funerals, and anybody in need could get help from the Loving Aid Society. I think it was originally called Love and Aid, and it was organized by some local people. And it's still standing. It's still on Miller Neal Boulevard. Miller Neal was important to the history of Lawrenceville, too. He worked in one of the barber shops, but he was a World War I veteran, and he spent a lot of time writing to soldiers who were in service. He wrote lots of letters to men in service.
My knowledge of Gwinnett history is fairly limited, but when I look at the growth that Gwinnett has experienced in the last 4 decades, I think it's safe to say that you spent a lot of your childhood and even early adulthood in a Gwinnett that hadn't seen a whole lot of change since its beginning. Small
It had
changes
not.
with towns. What do you think about the change that's come in the last several decades?
Well, I think a lot of it is great. I think we needed the change because we couldn't remain just a little enclosed community like we were. I think we've lost some of the personal touches, though, that we need to maintain. But I think there's a group of people who appreciate the history of Lawrenceville and Gwinnett County, and I think we need to. The Historical Society maintains a lot of history here, and I think that's important to us. I'm probably not giving you a very good answer here, but I do think as we become more educated and more aware of each other and more interconnected, maybe we can have more peace in the world. Right now, I think we're in pretty much turmoil, and we need to make some changes there.